Welcome to the KolbeCast, episode 263. Thank you for joining us. Today, Bonnie and I are joined by Kolbe's Vanessa Delgado and Antonia Castro to discuss astronomy. Antonio teaches physics and astronomy in addition to other classes for Kolbe Academy, and with Vanessa developed Kolbe Academy's astronomy text from a course developed by Professor Charlesworth. Along with the development of the text and course, we discuss the beauty of astronomy and why the study of it belongs in a classical education. We hope that you'll enjoy the show.
Hi there, I'm Bonnie, Kolbe homeschooling mom of 4 lads and lasses, liturgical musician, popcorn, and podcast fanatic.
And this is Stephen, homeschooling father of 5 and director of development for Kolbe Academy.
Today's episode is a deep dive into the Kolbe Academy curriculum for a look at astronomy, which is a valued part of the liberal arts education that Kolbe students have access to. This is a topic I've hoped to cover for a long time, so I'm glad it's working out today. For it, we are joined by 2 folks who know the course very well, Mr. Antonia Castro and Mrs. Vanessa Delgado. Hello to you both.
Hello.
Bonnie, thank you for having us.
Oh, you're most welcome. I'm so glad. Vanessa's been with us a few times, so I will link the episodes where we've had Vanessa on before. It's our first time getting to meet Mr. Castro, and it's a real pleasure to meet you, and I'm looking forward to getting to know you. Vanessa, let's catch up with you about how have you been since the last time you came to see us?
Very well. We are continuing to homeschool. I'm mom of 3. My youngest is in 2nd grade. My oldest is in 7th grade. I've got 2 middle schoolers this year. Moving closer to high school, which, is always a little bit nerve-wracking. And then we live in the Florida Keys, so we have a home in Miami as well. So we are still doing that, still commuting back and forth between the Keys and Miami, which we love very much. And I've been with Kolbe doing curriculum development for almost 4 years now, or maybe just over 4 years. I lose track, I think. Time flies when you're having fun. So very grateful to have been with Kolbe for this long. Love my job and love homeschooling, and we've been great, enjoying life.
Good deal. It's great to have you back. It's always a joy to visit with you and hear what you have to say. You have lots of good stuff to share with us, so I'm glad it's working out today.
It's great to be back.
Okay, Antonio, will you tell us about yourself and your background and your Kolbe connection and all that sort of good stuff?
Sure. Yes. So again, Antonia Castro. I've been teaching with Kolbe Academy. This is my end of the 2nd year. But before this, I've been teaching at Napa Valley College for almost 20 years. So this is, I think, my 19th year. And but also I teach at Kolbe Trinity, which is sort of a sister school to Kolbe Academy, and here in Napa. And my background in teaching is at college I teach physics and engineering classes, and at Kolbe Trinity I do biology, chemistry, physics, and also we're going into the environmental science. Yeah, so that's sort of my kind of my teaching background. In my profession, I'm also an engineer. I'm an electrical engineer. I graduated from Cal State Fullerton in 2000, and then I went to Stanford University to get my master's. But I grew up in Mexico. I grew up in a small town in Mexico, and actually, a lot of times when I think about astronomy, it always takes me back to this small town where a lot of times after a rainstorm, there was no electricity, no lights, and the only light that we had, it was the light from the moon. And my grandma used to say that, actually, back in the 40s and 50s, when they used to walk from town to town, and they will actually time it so that they will do those walks to visit people, relatives, whenever there was a full moon. So, anyways, I'm really happy to be teaching astronomy here at Kolbe Academy. And also another little connection here is that John Charlesworth, who wrote the original sort of reader or textbook, he used to teach at Napa Valley College. So actually, I run into him there, and I used to observe his classes. And he always said that teaching astronomy needed to be done for everyday people, right? So and I think that's the theme of the book. The book is astronomy for everyday people. So it also works for people that want to study astronomy in the future, right? But it really works for, it really opens the minds and the curiosity for folks that this is the only astronomy course that they might ever take.
Yeah. Oh, I'm excited to hear all about it. It's been something that I've had my eye on for a while. So our theme is exploring God's cosmos. It is one of our curriculum collaboration episodes that we have started doing here on the Kolbe cast. And so, Stephen, will you start us off, kind of orient us a bit on the intersection of scientific discovery, classical education, and a Catholic worldview that come together in the study of astronomy?
Good. Yeah, this is always really interesting because we, of course, we always talk about those liberal arts with the trivium, grammar, rhetoric, and logic, and then you've got the quadrivium, which is arithmetic and geometry and music and astronomy. So it's lumped right in with those things, and I think there's multiple. When I think about things, I think there's multiple reasons why it's there. And I think Antonio already kind of hit on one of those as far as that element of wonder. But when you look at it, just kind of technically speaking, with arithmetic and geometry, you've got mathematics, right? I mean, the things we're looking at in math, and then music and astronomy are applications of each of those. So music with arithmetic, and then astronomy with geometry. And so traditionally, astronomy was studying those eternal bodies. So it was the first step kind of before you got into natural philosophy, where things are all changing and such. But so you were studying these, for the ancients, these eternal bodies moving around in perfect circles was the idea with Ptolemy. So that's kind of the start of it. And so there was really that application. And then, of course, that's really where the modern physics and a lot of our modern studies come from, was trying to figure out what the paths of those things were. And along the way, we discovered there were actually big bodies moving around, and we weren't at the center of the universe necessarily. So there's that sort of aspect of where it started out with. But I think I think both looking at music and astronomy, you can see how those really touch the soul of man and kind of inspire this wonder that Antonio was talking about. And that was my experience as well with astronomy. I think it's why even though it's not as directly tied with geometry these days in our study of it, but I have the same experience. I grew up out in rural Wisconsin, and there were no other houses within a mile of us. So, when you get out on those nights and you can see all of the stars or the moon, or I remember the constellation Orion kind of being my friend in those cold winter mornings where it's all dark, but you could see him on the horizon. I think that's in the right spot. And we'll get into more of this, but I think it's not only those connections with the basic skills, but also just this opening up of the mind to things that are, well, in astronomy, so vast and beautiful and ordered. I think that's probably one of the reasons why you really want to have this, I think, in a classical program. You want to bring that out so you'll have that for the rest of your life. I think that's my first takes on it.
Steve, it really reminds me when I like to think about like everyday people, like kids growing up, right? The curiosity and what people do in everyday life, right? We learn to count, right? Tell the time, we take 6-7 classes a day. So counting and arithmetic, right? Being able to do some mathematics, right? And of course, the world around is geometric, right? We look around and we see objects, we see figures, right? And there's a geometry aspect to that, right? We all like music, we sing, right? And it just makes sense, right? That after sunset, right, we look at the sky and there's astronomy, right? So this quadrivium, it's just all these 4 elements, right, kind of come together in academia and really touches folks. So I really think how the importance of astronomy in Kolbe Academy and having the students giving students that opportunity to take this class. and learn about it.
I agree. I was not classically educated growing up, and I grew up in Miami, so I don't have the experience of the stars as much as you guys do. Now, I did grow up coming down to the Keys, and I do remember being able to see a lot more down here. But my education was very different. So my experience with astronomy growing up was very different, very elementary in my learning, and I have completely fallen in love with classical education now when we began homeschooling, and I realize what it is and how different it is, and I feel that one of the things that has attracted me most to it on all aspects is that sense of wonder that it brings to all subjects. There's just something captivating and awe-inspiring that classical education brings to all the subjects. So for me, astronomy fits perfectly into that category for that, because when you do start to learn about astronomy and you really look up to the skies and you start to kind of learn more than deeper than an elementary, right? When you start to bring into the mathematics and the geometry and all of those other things kind of come together, it really does bring in this cool wonder that I think when I've looked at it in previous experience, it hasn't brought that wonder that it has now, that I've kind of, it's funny, I'm working on the projects, but through new eyes than previous experience with it. But the wonder, I think, is the biggest thing, just really captivating and awe-inspiring. I think it's just wonderful that we are able to have it now updated and with all the things that we've done, because I really just can't think of any other word except wonder, captivating, awe-inspiring, and I think that fits very well with classical education and with what the goal of Kolbe is every day. So I'm very excited that this is part of what we're doing now.
And it's really the wonder of God's creation, right?
Exactly.
One of the conversations that I like to have with students is that God gave us this wonderful universe, right? And so He gave us the what, right? The universe, right? But not the how to study it, right? And the how to discover it, right? So that's what we get to do, right? We get to understand what God did, created. So it is amazing. There's one lesson in the book that is dedicated to the immenseness of the universe, how big it is, right? And it is one of the things that I try to spend not just one lesson, but I actually try to build into it, because the universe is pretty empty, right? And Earth is just one little planet here, right? And and when God created all these for us, right? And we get to learn about it, right? And one of the things I tell students is that just in the last 60 to 70 years, we have discovered more about the universe than what we discovered in the past 4,000 years. So it is amazing, and I tell them, I envy a lot of them, because right, they're going to discover probably more than what we know now. So in the lifetime. So it is wonderful and amazing and a great opportunity to be able to learn about God's creation.
When you are looking at a new class of students,
two things. Well, like I follow the textbook outline, right? But at the same time, the textbook is outlined and structured in a way to sort of introduce the student to the fundamentals that were in place until the 1600s or so, right? Some of the basic ideas, and but it is through those fundamentals and some of the astronomy of antiquity that brings curiosity to the students. Like, for example, one of the first things that we do is we talk about how planets move on the sky. And maybe we all seen them, and we've seen the moon and the sun, but they all sort of move along the same trajectory, right, of the sky. Why is that? Right? The names of the days of the week in Spanish, some in English, but in Spanish or Latin, right, and how they connect to the known planets in antiquity. So, and the sun and the moon, of course. So that connection actually, I think, engages a lot of students right from the beginning. That astronomy is not in an isolated topic that it's just looking at the sky and that's it. Right? It's actually much more than that. And I think Steve alluded to that earlier. That to me, I think of astronomy as sort of the maybe this is not the right term, sort of the mother of many other scientific fields, because it was through astronomy that led to physics and chemistry. So, anyways, I think engaging the students and opening their curiosity, and also one thing that we do, Vanessa will remember this. Many of the questions that we have at the end of the lessons encourages, and actually it's not just encouraging the students to complete the questions. They actually have to share or talk with parents, with friends, with siblings about what they're learning, right? And actually sometimes they have to actually ask them questions, right? So I think bringing that to the table, to the whether it's to to the dinner table or to the living room, right? I think it's an important aspect to really get the student to see astronomy outside just the class itself.
I definitely experienced that. I had two of my children were taking one of your classes. I got to see both of my kids kind of engaging with the text and with the class, but then also whether it was doing some of the labs or going out and seeing some of the things. So it definitely expanded beyond just a student sitting there with their textbook, unlike some other courses, of course. But so I definitely saw that expansion of the class into our family life.
Neat. Well, speaking of the textbook, so Kolbe has had an astronomy course for a while and a textbook to go with it, of course, but the textbook has recently undergone a beautiful transformation update that you two have been instrumental in. We have had the great pleasure of visiting with some of the publishing team on a previous episode, and a couple of episodes at this point, and so we will link all those in our show notes. But take us through the process of creating the textbook. We'll start with its existence already, and Antonio, you alluded to this to the author already. So take us through the origins of the book and let's go from there.
Yeah, so the book started as basically notes. John, his background was it was in chemistry, and chemistry and astronomy. So he used to teach both classes full time at Napa Valley College, and then he retired, and then he decided to come back, and he would teach only one class, and that was astronomy once a week. So when I met him in 2006, 2007, he was, we were basically, he called me I was his friend on Mondays, Monday afternoons, because that was the only time that he saw me, right? And then eventually I found out that he had 4 male grandkids, and they all wanted to study engineering. And they said, "Hey, they're all going to come here and they're going to go through your classes." So he goes, "Let me know if they don't behave." So of course, eventually, I initially I was a part-time instructor. Then I became a full-time instructor. And as full-time instructor, one of my responsibilities was to do observations in his class. So that's actually when I first got to see him teaching, and it was amazing to see him teaching. I mean, he would be talking to 50 students, 40 to 50 students in this classroom, right? And he would make use of his hands. I'd use the whiteboard, and it was all on a basically initially was some paper notes, right? And he put it together into a reader. So basically, he kind of organized it into a reader. And when he gave that reader to Kolbe Academy, and I don't know exactly the exact timing when he did that, he said, "Here's the reader. Make use of it. Make good use of it." Right. So I think that's what we had before I joined Kolbe Academy for a time. Right. So it had a lot of cartoons in there about astronomy, of course, and then some of the material, sort of makes sense, kind of the way it was laid out. But then, like I said, I was teaching at Kolbe Trinity. Actually, there's a little connection there. One of my former students, uh, uh, Daniel Rolls, I saw him one day at Kolbe Trinity, and I said, "Hey, well, Daniel, you have kids here?" He says, "Oh yeah, I have my daughter is here, and my son is here." I said, "Oh great." So then I found out that Chris was his brother, right? And then Chris found out that I was Daniel's teacher, and he was, "Hey, we have a project, right?" And then they put me in contact with Vanessa, and a few other folks, and we said, and then basically he said, "Here's the book that we have," and Vanessa and I kind of said, "This is the book that we have. We need to work on it, right?"
Yeah.
And the instruction was, not to. I mean, actually, we didn't have a lot of instructions, but it's like, let's modernize it. Let's update it. Let's make sure that it has the right topics in there, and that's what we did. And we worked for maybe 6 to 9 months, Vanessa, right, on different things, right? And it was a great project. So we changed some of the order of things, and the overall structure of the book is broken into three units. The first unit is basically the fundamentals, right? Hey, this is what astronomy was in antiquity. This is what it is now, since the 1600s or so. And these are some of the tools that astronomers use. And everything from telescopes to spectral analysis. Oh, and by the way, nowadays we have all these amazing tools in spacecrafts, that we have made. And then we also have this one lesson about how immense the universe is, which actually, to me, is one of the most important lessons, which actually you don't find. I don't think I have seen it in another textbook. They just say, "Oh, the universe is big," sure, but there's no meat behind it, right? So, anyways, and then the second unit focuses on our solar system. So the sun, the 8 planets, the moons, the asteroids, the comets that we see coming by, and then the last unit focuses basically on the rest of the universe, which is our own galaxy, other galaxies, stars, and the evolution of stars, right? And also how we, different techniques to figure out distances to stars. For some reason, we are very interested in the distances to stars, because that gives you an idea about how big the universe is.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's kind of in a nutshell, kind of the structure.
So from a curriculum standpoint, it was very similar to what Antonio mentioned. I don't have the backstory. How much I wish I would have had the experience to watch him teaching Professor Charles Worth, because the book is very much written the way, almost like you're hearing him in lecture, right? So it's written almost, it's not interactive because you're reading it, but just the way it's worded, the way he writes, is very engaging. Like if you were listening to someone speak who kind of just pulls you in the way they explain things, and the way the words that are chosen, the way that he kind of puts things out. So Kolbe had been using this for some time, but we needed to kind of build it out and update it and help make it into kind of a full product to match up with some of the projects that we've been doing. So the goal was to kind of take his book and then bring it to life, you know, bring in the images, add in the components that we would normally have in our other books. And really use the fact that he just in his writing connects well with the readers. He's user friendly. It's a high level of instruction, but it's very accessible to the average student that doesn't have an immense background in astronomy. But it's also deep enough for the student who has had that. So he's got a really, really nice balance in it. So it was, you know, taking this book and kind of bringing it to life. And then doing the design work. So adding in the images, adding in just the organization of it. Antonia and I sat for a while. I want to say we went back and forth for a couple of weeks. Okay, what if we move this section here and this section here and we group it together here? And we kind of set it out in a way that made sense for the full course, but also that just everything kind of flowed into the other. And then in that process, we realized there was a couple of sections that we probably should add in, just because, you know, the advancements happen so quickly. Like Antonia was saying, you know, the advancements in the science for astronomy are like exponentially just happening. So we wanted to we added in two sections. There was the telescope and then exploration of space. So we worked together, we bounced them back and forth. It was like, okay, what do you think about this section? Read this. Okay, he would write a section and then I would write a section and we would bounce it back and forth. And we added those two sections in there, both in the first unit that kind of explores the fundamentals. And then once we had everything kind of laid out, then it was, all right, working on keywords. Antonio put together these fantastic concept maps for every single lesson, where the students can actually create a map. So the concept maps are like these bubbles that go through, the students fill in, and they go through the key concepts and the key ideas, and how, not only what are they, but how they kind of fit together in the lesson. And he did a phenomenal job with adding those in. So that was added in. We put together keywords, definitions, you know, what are the words in each lesson that kind of are new, what are being introduced new, the students probably not familiar with, that we need to define clearly, have the students learn those. And throughout the course plan, we also did lesson questions at the end of each. And that was really fun because some of them are just kind of reviewing the material that was discussed. And then every single lesson has questions that go a little bit deeper and have them go out and kind of connect it. And some of them, that, like Antonia was mentioning, some of them, they have to kind of bring up conversations. They have to interview family. Some of them, they have to kind of go outside and observe and take notes and see what they see. So we've really tried to make it work and use all of these little tools to bring his book to life. It was really a fun project. The sense of wonder that we were talking about earlier, every time I sat down to work at the computer, that we were opening up the text, and then you're adding these, you know, searching for images, and wow, this is like unbelievable, this image, and that would fit perfect in here. And it really was a phenomenal. And then one of the big things that we added was the lab component, which Antonio also was a huge part of bringing that in because of his experience. And so the lab component was so important because we wanted it to really have a hands-on component where the students weren't just reading the book. Like Antonio was saying, you know, part of astronomy is the beauty of the world, right? And God's creation, and really having the possibility for the students to not only just read the book, but actually go out and experience it. And also hands-on with some of the projects and things, like they actually build a telescope in some of the labs. They really do things that are hands-on to kind of give them a deeper understanding of all of the lessons that are being taught. And so that was a huge component that we wanted to bring in, and it was just so fun adding in. I'm not going to lie, there were several times that Antonio and I were having discussions, and okay, like, what about this lab and what about that one, and let's review this one, And it was like, man, I want to do this. I'm gonna go home and try this myself.
I love that. Antonio, say more about that because I've noticed what you give to the families who are doing the course at home is highly detailed lists of very accessible, easy to find things that make it very much it seem very doable. Where we might hear we're going to build a telescope and be like, yeah, okay, but you have really broken it down and made it very very doable for us. So say more about these labs and how you approach them and how you make them work for everybody.
Yeah, I actually like I mentioned earlier, my background is also as an electrical engineer. I'm hands-on, right? I'm a practical person, right? So to me, it's like if somebody says, "Oh, this is a telescope," and I say, "Oh, let's make one."
Neat.
And also, this project came about after the pandemic. When the pandemic hit, all my in-person classes that I was doing at Napa Valley College, everything had to shift to online. So let me tell you, I had never taught a class online. None of my classes were ever online. So, but we all got on it, and I really adapt to it. And one of the things that I wanted to do is I wanted to have the same experience for students like they had in a face-to-face class as they did in a Zoom class, right? So I started putting all the labs that we had and tried to find an equivalent as much as possible. And I started going online looking for simulations for different things, things that they could start building. We started building kits. So when this project came along about doing a lab book to go with astronomy, I mean, a lot of this information was there. It's just like kind of putting it together and align it, with the material in the textbook. So, we said, okay, what's a good number of labs, right? And we said, well, because there are 3 units. Again, I mentioned there's 3 units in the book. We figured maybe four labs per unit is a good number, right? So, I started kind of looking at the material that we had in each of the units, and thinking about, okay, what is the good lab, and for these units, right? And start thinking about, one of the things that is important for me as an instructor, is to kind of put yourself in the shoes of the student, right? I know the material to begin with, but the student doesn't, right? So you have to kind of put yourself in the shoes of the student, and what is that curiosity that they have? What kind of questions, or how can you make it interesting for me as a student, right? So that's what we tried to do here, is to really say, let's build a simple tool to look at the sky and figure out the elevation to the moon, right? How do we tell people where a celestial object is if you're talking to them on the phone, right? How do you orient yourself, right? Here on the northern hemisphere, we said, oh, let's look at Polaris. Well, how do you tell someone where Polaris is, right? So we had to start with some kind of reference, right, and some way to figure out how to orient ourselves. But even these simple tools, again, engages the student to say, hey, astronomy is more than just reading a textbook and answering some questions. It involves geometry, some calculations that they have to do, right? So anyways, that was the whole idea. And like Vanessa said, one of the labs, we had to build a telescope. That always reminds me of Galileo Galilei, right?
Which was part of that lesson, yeah.
Yeah, which actually is the beginning of modern astronomy. Modern astronomy, I mean, we can argue when it began,
Yeah.
but it's over a period of time. But really, one of the points of inflection is when Galileo built his first telescope, right? And he pointed to the sky, right? To Jupiter, to the moon, and Venus in particular, right? And then, of course, then he made some business out of that, pointing it to the sea, to see what ships were coming into the port. But anyways, so to me, and when Vanessa and I were working on this project, having that lab, it just made sense. And I think that was something that was I think missing, in the in the book to begin with, right? There was no lab component. Now, what I do want to say is that John, in the class that he used to teach here in Napa Valley College, he had observation nights. So he would actually take the students out of the classroom and go outside, and had 3, 4, sometimes 5 telescopes. And in fact, a few times I actually helped him, because you had to adjust the telescope, sort of track the moon, or if you were looking at a planet, to track a planet. So a few times I actually help him out with, or the students need some help with, with kind of orienting themselves with the use of the telescope. So he used to do that. Of course, when we are online, right? We don't have that luxury to just say, oh, let's walk outside all together. But each individual has now the opportunity to walk out and engage with a family member, with other friends, and or build their own little devices. So a telescope is one of them, so, which is great.
Yeah, we really tried to select what were the most impactful labs that could also be done with simple materials. So remember, that was a big part of the conversation. We could easily, I think, with any science course, especially at a high school level or higher, you can easily ramp up a nice bill with materials needed. And yeah, and it's just the reality of what it is. There's so many awesome things available for labs,
Right.
But they can get really pricey. And so one of the things that we wanted to look at was, for your average homeschooling family, right, that doesn't have, we have a small telescope, but we don't have anything fancy at home. And a lot of families don't have any telescopes at all. So how can they go through the labs without ramping up a big bill, and with simple materials that they have at home? And this is where we really tried hard to pick labs, and Antonio came up with, all right, we can make that simpler this way, and what if we use this, and what if we use that? And so it really is very accessible, hands-on, with simple materials, and what would make the biggest impact hands-on to reinforce the lesson that was in the book without being overly complex or expensive for the students and the families.
You're just reminding me here of how much of an impact those labs have had on me. It kind of, it's like with astronomy, you can go online and you can like show me a picture of Jupiter's moon, and you can just, there it is. But I remember the first time a friend of mine had a very nice telescope, and he put it up and showed me one of the moons of Jupiter. I could look into this thing and I could see it.
Wow.
And that stands out to me much more than the the many pictures I could see online, which are further removed. It's very moving to experience that firsthand.
Yeah. What was it like for your kids doing the labs in the course?
I had 2 children in the course at the same time going through, so that was kind of fun to watch. Maggie, my wife, did most of the labs with them, so I would just occasionally turn around as they were I think they were mapping out like relative distances in our living room and lining those up, and then sticking a pole out in the yard so that they could take, I think it was for sunset or something, so they needed to get an angle or something like that. But it went well, and they seemed really well. I think they enjoyed doing them. It was getting started sometimes. Then it's like, okay, we got to move and go do this. But then, yeah, it was really interesting to watch.
Yeah, and and one of the labs is very, very simple, but it's actually the result out of it, right? It has a lot of geometry, trigonometry, sort of kind of 3-dimensional. But what it does is that the idea is around the equinox, right? When the sun is right over the equator, right? The idea is for the student to determine the angle of elevation right? So if we are looking into the horizon straight, right? At noon, if I want to look at the sun, which I remember we have this note on the textbook: never look directly at the sun. Okay.
I think we put
So
it in red.
yeah.
Several times.
Side note,
Yeah.
please
But
remember, warning.
but if we look at the angle of elevation that the sun has at noon, right? And you measure that angle, right? And consider also your latitude where you live, right? And you take those two numbers together, uh, they add up to 90, right? And there's a little bit of geometry there, right? To explain that, right? So connecting the geometry with the sort of the geography, if you will, with astronomy, and telling the student, right, what they just did, right? Hey, this is what you did in this lab, right? I, I think they take out something more than just taking the classes separately, but putting them together, the integration of that, I think is great.
That speaks exactly to many of the goals we have for the reason we're undertaking this particular type of education, classical education, right? Yeah.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The labs towards the end, they get a little complicated. There's a little more math in there. The purpose, and actually what I did, for example, this year is to is to not so much have them worry about the mathematics, but actually even walk them through the math behind it, right? And not having to really do it on their own, but to really see, at least have a little glimpse of, it can get complicated, and it's not, not to say that it's difficult, because I like to think about it that everything is difficult if you don't know what it is, right? But once you start looking into it, step by step, it's easy, right? So I said, this is what astronomers do to figure out distances to stars, right? This is the math behind it, right? So I go, if you are for it, right? If you want to take another course in astronomy, right? When you get into college, this is what you're going to be doing. So, just be prepared for it, right? One student, I think it was last year, said, that he was worried about, seeing all the math behind that. But once we went through it, he goes, I was not afraid to actually look at it once you kind of explain. He had never seen a square root.
Mm-hmm. Well, it took, yeah.
So I mean, just things like that, right? That things that when we learn about scientific notation, square roots, and things like that, it can be very complicated. It could be intimidating, right? So and that's not the idea behind this, but it's to give them a glimpse of what is actually done, right, in the real world.
One of the dimensions I mentioned at the beginning is the Catholic worldview that this course has. So speak a little bit to that.
One of the things that I like that we bring up in the textbook is that how many of the discoveries in astronomy, in the sciences, were made by Catholic priests, right? And by other religious folks from Catholicism. And that's because, one is they had access to textbooks, they had the time, right, to do this. But I think very important is they had a curiosity, right? Somehow the Holy Spirit was sort of saying, hey, look at this, try this, right? And so anyways, so I think that is very important. And this is something that we have several places in our textbook when we actually make references to that. And we have quotations from different folks, throughout the years. So yeah, it's so and so, some of the remarks are, sometimes I like to leave them to the students to sort of for interpretation, right? Some of the remarks I like to kind of put on my own interpretation of what the person was trying to say. But I think if I can put it in a nutshell, is that God created this wonderful universe, and He gave us the what, the stars, the planets, the comets, right, the galaxies, and it's up to us to figure out how to study them, right? and to interpret them. Yeah. So, and to learn about them.
There's actually an entire lesson in unit 3 that's dedicated to cosmology and theology, where Professor Charles Worth goes through, and again, his way of explaining things really draws you in. But he goes through all the arguments that you typically hear that argue against, right, separating faith and science, and he goes through all of them one by one. And it really is a fantastic way to kind of close out the 3 units, because throughout we have little parts that the quotes that he adds in. I mean, at the very beginning, the first quote in the book, where right on the dedication pages, is "Astronomy compels the soul to look upward and leads us from this world to another," which is a Plato quote. So little by little, throughout the book, we kind of touch into the grandness of God's creation and this and that, little lines here and there. But then towards the end of the book, he has this big lesson that kind of really dives into it, and dives into the arguments that you hear. He actually goes through several different ones. Maybe we're just lucky, maybe something else caused it, and he goes through each of them one by one, very logically, puts in his explanations that really his way of writing is fantastic, and kind of goes through it. And then towards the end, he has the student reflect, formulating. He has one of the last sections is formulating their beliefs in what we just read. And what do you think? Look at everything we just read, how grand the universe is, how perfect everything had to line up in order for us to live where we live right now and see everything that we have and have everything that we have. Just everything, how perfectly needs to line up. Now, what do you think? And he adds some wonderful quotes in there as well. And then the lesson review questions are very much have the students kind of reflect and dig deeper, and bring that into their own life and their own beliefs. It's a really fantastic lesson there, and it's towards the end of the course, which is kind of a great way, I think, to kind of, they've now seen kind of the big picture, and now they can really reflect on that.
You're just reminding me of, I mean, our church is so interesting here. It was bringing in astronomy in our church. So, like, we have the Vatican Observatory. There is a religious brother who is the head of. It's like, what? It's amazing. It's interesting that the church still views it as this very important thing for the church.
And he has a podcast, by the way. Okay, so this is a high school level class. It's available as a homeschool course and also live online. So what do you recommend, though, where in the 4 years of high school, is there an ideal time to take the course in the sequence of the high school years?
I can put my 2 cents with a disclaimer that I'm not a counselor.
Sure.
But I alluded to astronomy, in my view, right, is fundamental for other sciences, right? So in my opinion, this should be early in high school, right? Now, a lot of times, because of the track the student has, right, it's sort of making more sense maybe to do their biology, chemistry, and physics. And if they have an extra year at the end, right, then do the astronomy. It can work that way. It is itself a course that can be taken sort of at any time. There's no sort of physics or chemistry background, right? Sort of the prerequisite is some is arithmetic and some in geometry, right? So there's some basic geometry, and even some of that I try to go through that in the book, like how to find the percent difference between 2 numbers, angles, measuring angles and things like that. So yeah, I think ideally is 9th grade, I will say, but depending on the sequence that the student has, it could also be as a senior if they have taken older science.
I'm going to echo that as well. It's really flexible in that what Antonia was just explaining, the prerequisites Even the geometry required, the student doesn't need to have already taken geometry because it's pretty basic. It walks them through it. But depending on the track, so I'll give you the example of my own son who's planning for 8th grade this upcoming year. And we're looking at possibly taking it this upcoming year. His track is engineering as well. So we're looking at doing the astronomy early on, so then we can start to hit the more advanced physics and chemistries further on. But for the students that aren't going into very science or mathematical fields, they can do more entry-level chemistry and physics that don't have to be as in-depth, physical calculus and all that, and then move the astronomy a little later on. So it's very flexible and it is very doable. It's a very accessible class for all levels, students that are very science inclined and students that are not very science inclined. So it's very friendly in terms of that. And, just like with all homeschooling things, it's kind of depending on the student and what they'd like to do. It really works well anywhere in the range from 9 to 12, depending on their plan.
I think my children were a 10th grader and a 12th grader when they both took the course together, and they both weren't overwhelmed, but so it was good.
Okay. Any final thoughts or takeaways on the topic of astronomy?
I think I said this earlier. Astronomy is not just a class. It is something that we actually get to experience every day. Every day, after sunset, when we look up in the sky and look at the stars, and we try to figure things out. Once you take an astronomy class, you will appreciate, right? When you looking up at the sky, it's not going to be the same anymore for you. So that has been my own experience. Of course, I teach the class, but it is, it becomes something that becomes part of your sort of everyday thing. And of course, you're not going to be talking about it every day, but if you want to, that you have an opportunity.
I can very much echo that. My experience with astronomy, like I said in the beginning, was very different. And it changes your overall view when you look up at the sky after you've taken the course and you've gone through it. Whereas before, even though, right, you may not know every single thing that you're looking at, you have just such a greater appreciation for it. Because of that wonder that was kind of rooted throughout the course, and that curiosity that's just sparked throughout. The course does such a fantastic job of that. So even I would say as a parent, right, that would be taking it as a homeschool course, that wouldn't be doing it online, follow along, look at the pictures, because it'll spark that in you as well. And then also just reiterating, it's really an accessible course. I know that astronomy can seem something kind of overwhelming for some people, and it's really not. We really, really worked hard to build it in a way that it was accessible and possible for anyone to do it, including the mom that hasn't taken astronomy since elementary school.
Love it. Okay.
So even today, military pilots, right, had to take a course, not necessarily astronomy, but is whatever, to be able to learn how to navigate using the stars, right? So, anyways, this is how in the old days, right, ships used to sort of navigate the waters in the Atlantic or in the Mediterranean. So has a lot of applications.
Yes. And Stephen, you and I, we talked about Carry On, Mr. Bowditch, the book.
Yeah.
Favorite read aloud here and good audiobook.
Well, that book, I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, Antonia, but it's about a navigator on a ship, and he's got all of the logs and things. And it hadn't dawned on me before reading that book how difficult it was to know where you were. So one of his things is he's trying to clean up the logbooks because there are all these accidents that happen because there's incorrect numbers in them, and so ships will get off course because they're taking their readings and such. And yeah, and we lose track of that today. I think it's easy to lose track of all of it.
Is that used to be at least in the junior high literature curriculum, I think, right? maybe? Am I making
I think
that
it still is.
Okay.
In fact, it's on my list and we haven't gotten to it this year. And I keep wondering, I got to look into it because we like to do the read alouds and kind of discuss everything together.
I like to bring in the extra dimension of the middle school curriculum. I like to weave in where we can all the ways the Kolbe curriculum is magnificent like that. We're grateful for all of the work you all have put into this course. Our show notes are going to have a link for folks to have a peek at this course. It will include a course plan sample, some textbook pages, and a lab. So there's a link in our show notes for listeners to take advantage of that offer. We will also have links to some of the episodes that are relevant to this conversation or that I mentioned earlier. Antonio and Vanessa, it's been a wonderful conversation with you. Thank you for coming to visit with us.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Subscribe to the KolbeCast on your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss an episode. And let us know how we're doing by leaving a rating or a review. And as always, feel free to email us at podcast@kolbe.org.
Mary, our Mother, pray for us. St. Maximilian Kolbe, St. Ignatius of Loyola, Holy Saints and Angels, pray for us. Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam.